They saw the smoke first, thin gray streaks drifting over the treetops, carried by the wind from a battlefield they had not yet reached. It was 1,400 hours on the 28th of June, 1944, when a German panzer commander stepped onto the railway junction near Borisov, watching steel giants roll off the flat cars one by one. Panthers and Tigers clattered onto the gravel, their engines rumbling like distant thunder, while Soviet artillery shells burst somewhere behind the station, closing in a little more with every minute. He knew what waited beyond the tree line. The Eastern Front was collapsing. Operation Bagration had ripped open the German lines and sent entire armies into retreat. Yet here, on this quiet stretch of track, one of the last fully equipped armored divisions left in the Reich was being asked to hold the road to Minsk. His orders were simple and impossible. Buy time for the Fourth Army to escape, even as the Soviet Guards tank army advanced with numbers no tactic could truly counter. And as he watched the last Panther tank roll onto the dirt, a question settled over him like dust from the tracks. In a war now ruled by arithmetic, by industry, by mass, by inevitability, how long could one panzer commander shape the fate of an entire army? In the summer of 1944, the Eastern Front no longer resembled a line, it was a fracture. Operation Bagration, launched on June 23, had struck the German Army Group Center with a force that stunned even seasoned observers. Artillery thundered across a 500-kilometer front, and within 72 hours, entire corps had vanished from the maps. Encirclements at Bobruisk and Vitebsk collapsed. The Fourth Army, ordered by Hitler to stand fast east of Minsk, was being swallowed by converging Soviet thrusts. What had taken Germany 3 years to build was unraveling in less than a week. Into this catastrophe arrived the 5th Panzer Division, one of the few German formations still near full strength on the Eastern Front. They rolled into the Borisov sector with 125 operational tanks, 70 Panther tanks, 55 Panzer IVs, and the heavy Tigers of the 505th Battalion. Their crews were veterans, many of them survivors of Kursk, men who had learned tank warfare the hard way in smoke, mud, and fire. They were joined by infantry remnants, security detachments, engineers, and stragglers fleeing westward from shattered formations. All of them were placed under the command of a panzer general, whose reputation had been forged in battles from Gomel to Kursk. This improvised formation would soon be known simply as his Kampfgruppe. Their mission was brutally clear. The road and rail lines leading into Minsk had to remain open long enough for the Fourth Army to break out. If those routes were severed, nearly 150,000 German soldiers would be trapped east of the city. The Kampfgruppe was to hold delay, withdraw, hold again. It was a textbook model of mobile defense, but it collided with a political reality. Hitler had declared Minsk a fortress city, forbidding withdrawals and insisting on static defense where mobility was the only path to survival. Meanwhile, the Soviet plan unfolded with mechanical precision. The 5th Guards Tank Army was driving from the northeast, the 2nd Guards Tank Corps from the east, and the 65th Army from the south. Their mobile units were advancing nearly 50 kilometers a day, supported by aircraft that roamed uncontested across the sky. German columns retreating toward Minsk were bombed without mercy. Bridges across the Berezina River fell under repeated attacks. Roads were jammed with refugees, wounded soldiers, and abandoned equipment, an army dissolving into chaos. On June 28, the Kampfgruppe deployed into its first defensive line. Panthers took the forward ridge lines along the Moscow-Minsk highway. Panzer IVs were positioned 2 kilometers behind them, ready to cover a withdrawal. Tiger tanks dug in near the rail junction and river crossings, anchoring the strongest points with long-range firepower. Infantry of the 170th Division built hasty barricades along the roads, preparing choke points through which the retreating Fourth Army could pass. Engineers wired the Berezina bridges for demolition. It was a plan designed not for victory, but for time measured, not in days, but in hours. And everyone on that line understood that the opening blows were coming. The first probing attacks began on June 29. Soviet reconnaissance battalions slipped through the forests east of Borisov, testing the German lines with cautious thrusts. Artillery cracked along the Berezina as engineers worked through the night-building pontoon bridges under streaks of tracer fire. By dawn on July 1, the river, once the last natural barrier before Minsk, was no longer an obstacle. Soviet armor was already across in strength. At 0800 hours, the battlefield erupted. Three Soviet tank brigades, more than 150 tanks with infantry, artillery, and air support advanced in a wide 6-kilometer front directly toward the German positions. The lead T-34 seconds came down the highway in staggered formations, their silhouettes emerging from the tree line like shadows taking shape. The Panthers opened fire first. At 1,400 meters, their 75mm guns cracked with a sharp, metallic rhythm, punching through Soviet armor with frightening precision. One after another, T-34 seconds burst into flame along the roadside. German loaders kept a relentless tempo, 6 rounds a minute, hands blistered, ears ringing. To the north, the Tigers held the high ground near the rail junction. Their long-barreled 88 seconds reached out past 2,000 meters, knocking out tanks before the Soviet crews even realized they were under fire. Yet for every Soviet tank destroyed, more pushed forward. They did not pause to recover the wounded. They did not halt to reorganize. They simply kept coming, wave after wave. Above the smoke, Soviet aircraft circled. Il-2 Sturmovik attack planes swooped low, their rockets streaking toward the German positions marked by burning tank hulks. Moments later, the roar of Katyusha rocket launchers rolled across the field, a rising, trembling howl followed by a wall of explosions that shook the ground beneath the German crews. Dirt and shrapnel rained down across the Panther lines. It was warfare designed not just to kill, but to overwhelm, to break cohesion with noise and pressure. By midday, the first Panther platoons were running low on ammunition. Several tanks suffered mechanical breakdowns, engines pushed beyond limits, gearboxes worn thin from constant repositioning. 3 Panthers were destroyed outright by Soviet tank fire. 2 more were crippled by artillery. The German commander ordered a phased withdrawal. Panthers fell back to secondary ridgelines. Panzer IVs moved forward to cover them. Infantry teams armed with Panzerfausts stayed behind in shattered farmhouses and roadside ditches, striking Soviet armor at point-blank range before slipping away. The fighting did not ease on July 2. Instead, fresh Soviet brigades replaced those battered the previous day. Their doctrine was simple and merciless: mass, momentum, and unbroken pressure. By afternoon, the Tigers were isolated, their positions bypassed by Soviet columns flowing around them like water around rock. Still, they fought, firing until their ammunition ran dry or until Soviet tanks closed to ranges where even an 88mm gun could not swing fast enough. In 2 days of brutal fighting, the Kampfgruppe had destroyed nearly 90 Soviet armored vehicles. But the Soviet advance continued, inexorable and undiminished. The battle was not a contest of skill anymore, it was a collision between excellence and sheer numerical force. And the outcome was beginning to reveal itself. By the evening of July 2, the truth could no longer be ignored. Ammunition stocks were dwindling, fuel reserves were shrinking, and the Soviet advance showed no sign of slowing. The German commander ordered another fighting withdrawal, step by step toward Minsk. Each position held only long enough to delay the inevitable. As the Panthers fell back, Soviet units pressed forward with fresh formations, rotating in new battalions as if the battlefield were an endless reservoir of men and machines. On July 3, the noose tightened around the city. Before dawn, elements of the 2nd Guards Tank Corps broke through the final German defensive line and entered Minsk from the east. Street fighting was brief and hopeless. By July 4, the city was fully in Soviet hands. The encirclement, once a looming threat, was now a sealed pocket. Nearly 100,000 German soldiers were trapped east of Minsk, hemmed in by converging Soviet armies. Some attempted desperate breakouts through forests and marshland. A few small groups slipped through gaps in the Soviet lines. Most did not. For the Kampfgruppe, a message arrived too late to matter for the 4th Army. Permission to fall back toward Molodechno, 60 kilometers to the northwest. The order offered survival, but not redemption. The men understood what had happened behind them. The 4th Army, their comrades, was gone, swallowed by Operation Bagration's relentless drive. The Kampfgruppe now fought to preserve what remained of their own command. The withdrawal through the first week of July was a mosaic of rearguard actions, demolished bridges, and hasty ambushes. Engineers blew culverts and rail lines behind the columns. Infantry covered crossroads with machine gun nests and Panzerfausts until Soviet armored spearheads forced them to flee. Any vehicle that broke down was abandoned and destroyed to prevent capture. Convoys moved at night, guided by dimmed headlights through villages still smoldering from the previous day's bombardments. By July 8, the 5th Panzer Division reported only 18 operational tanks. 11 days earlier, it had arrived with 125. The division, once a veteran formation that had fought from Poland to France, from Greece to Moscow, from Rzhev to Kursk, had been reduced to a remnant. Its seasoned crews, the men who had survived 3 years of brutal armored warfare on the Eastern Front, were gone. The cohesion that had made the division feared was shattered. What remained was a ghost formation, retreating westward toward Lithuania. The scale of the loss was difficult to comprehend. Records show that roughly 15,000 soldiers served with the division in 1944. Fewer than 2,000 would survive the war. Most of the casualties occurred during the weeks of Operation Bagration and the subsequent retreat through Belarus and Poland. For the survivors, Minsk became a line drawn across their lives, the place where a proud division ceased to exist as a fighting force. In the broader scope of the Eastern Front, the destruction of the 5th Panzer Division was not an isolated tragedy. It was one fragment of a larger collapse, an army group uprooted, its reserves exhausted, its command structure in ruins. The battlefield around Minsk only revealed the human cost of a strategic disaster that no tactical brilliance could repair. While the tank battle near Minsk raged in early July 1944, another struggle was unfolding an ocean away. In Normandy, American and British forces were breaking out from the beachheads, won on D-Day. The Western Allies were pushing inland, stretching Germany across 2 fronts it no longer had the strength to sustain. What happened at Minsk was therefore not just a local disaster, it was a decisive revelation of Germany's strategic bankruptcy. For American military analysts at the time, Germany's predicament was stark. A modern war could not be won by tactical brilliance alone. It demanded production capacity, fuel, trained personnel, and the ability to absorb losses while continuing to fight. Operation Bagration exposed the mathematical imbalance that now defined the Eastern Front. The Soviet Union was producing more T-34 tanks in a single month than Germany could build Panthers and Tigers in half a year. Their training programs graduated crews faster than Germany could replace its losses. Soviet air power grew, while the Luftwaffe declined under the strain of fuel shortages and relentless Allied bombing. To American eyes, this was the same pattern that defined the Pacific and European theaters. Industrial strength shaping the battlefield long before soldiers fired a shot. The tank battle near Minsk demonstrated this principle with brutal clarity. The 5th Panzer Division may have destroyed hundreds of Soviet tanks, but every Soviet loss was replaced. German losses were not. Quality had met quantity, and quantity was winning. There was also a political dimension. Hitler's refusal to authorize timely withdrawals turned tactical setbacks into strategic catastrophes. Orders to defend fortress, cities drained manpower from mobile formations. Reserves were committed piecemeal, preventing the concentration of force that German doctrine required. In contrast, Soviet command structures refined through years of costly learning now executed vast operational maneuvers with confidence and coordination. From Washington to London, the implications were clear. Operation Bagration shattered Army Group Center, eliminated Germany's last reserves in Belarus, and opened the road to Poland. By August 1944, the Soviet Union had advanced 600 kilometers. Germany was no longer a two-front power. It was a nation fighting for time. And for American strategists watching the Eastern Front, this raised a sobering question, one that echoes long after the guns fell silent. How many battles can an army win tactically while losing the war strategically? Today, the fields northwest of Minsk look peaceful. The forests have grown back. Villages once shattered by artillery have been rebuilt. Farmers still uncover relics of that July tracks, fragments of turrets, the rusted bones of Panther and T-34 tanks buried beneath the soil. There are no monuments marking the stand of the Kampfgruppe or the desperate retreat that followed. The landscape remembers quietly, holding the echoes of a battle that shaped the fate of an entire army. For the German panzer commander who led those men, the war did not end at Minsk. He continued to fight through the retreat into Lithuania and East Prussia, refusing to waste lives in hopeless stands, even when Hitler demanded it. In the final days of the war, he chose to surrender with his soldiers rather than flee by air. 10 years in Soviet captivity left him physically broken. Yet he returned to Germany and lived out his days in silence, never writing memoirs, never seeking attention, carrying the weight of his decisions with a dignity few would ever see. His story, and the story of the 5th Panzer Division, is not one of victory or defeat. It is a reminder of the limits of tactical skill in the face of strategic collapse. During the tank battle near Minsk, Panthers and Tigers proved their worth. German crews demonstrated mastery earned through years of brutal combat. But Operation Bagration was not decided by individual clashes. It was decided by numbers, production lines, manpower, fuel reserves, and the relentless momentum of an enemy that could absorb losses and continue the advance. The Eastern Front's greatest truth was measured not in tank duels, but in arithmetic. And yet, within that arithmetic were human beings, crews who fought because their comrades depended on them, soldiers on both sides who stepped into machines knowing the odds they faced. Their actions, their courage, and their suffering deserve to be remembered beyond statistics. As we look back on the summer of 1944, one question remains. What lessons from Minsk still matter today? Is it the danger of rigid leadership, the cost of ignoring reality, or the sobering reminder that even the finest soldiers cannot overcome a war already lost at the strategic level? Share your thoughts below. We read every comment. If you value history's lessons and the stories of those who lived them, consider subscribing for more explorations of the Eastern Front and the battles that shaped our world. The tank battle near Minsk may have ended decades ago, but its echoes remain. Thank you for watching and for remembering.